I never thought I'd find myself living in the kind of chaos you read about in tabloids. But there I was, standing in the middle of my own life, shattered into a million jagged pieces. My name is Mark Peterson. I'm 37, married for 8 years to the woman I thought was my soulmate, Jessica. But soulmates don't sneak around behind your back, do they? The night it all began, I was cleaning up after dinner. Jessica had made some excuse about needing to stay late at work again, her 5th late night that month. Deadlines, she had said, her voice as flat as her explanation. I wasn't buying it, but I let it slide. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband. It was only when I went to toss some trash and saw her phone lighting up on the counter that I realized something wasn't right. The name flashing across the screen wasn't one I recognized. Brian. Curiosity got the better of me, and I tapped on the message. I can't wait to see you tonight. Wish I could stay longer. It read. My stomach dropped. Blood roared in my ears. I scrolled further, heart pounding like a war drum. The messages weren't just suggestive, they were explicit. Plans, descriptions of encounters, and even photographs. My mind went blank, like a fuse had blown in my brain. This wasn't some innocent mistake. This was Jessica. My wife, my partner, the woman who had sworn to love me, betraying me in the most humiliating way possible. By the time she got home, I was shaking. I couldn't decide whether to explode with rage or break down into sobs. The worst part? When I confronted her, I could see the shift in her eyes. Not guilt, not remorse, just cold, unbothered defiance. Why were you going through my phone, Mark? She snapped, as if I was the one who had done something wrong. Who the hell is Brian? I demanded, waving the phone in her face. Her lip curled. You're so dramatic. He's just a friend. Friends don't text each other about staying longer in bed. I shot back, my voice cracking. God, you're so insecure. She spat, rolling her eyes. This is why I can't stand being around you anymore. You suffocate me. Suffocate her? My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. I didn't recognize the woman standing in front of me. This wasn't the loving, caring Jessica I married. This was someone else. Someone who lied effortlessly and twisted the blame onto me. I wanted to scream, to shake her and make her understand what she'd done to me. But all I could do was stare at her in disbelief. And then she dropped the bombshell. You know what? Maybe you should just stop pretending we're happy, Mark, she said, her tone dripping with venom. Brian makes me feel alive. You haven't done that in years. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. Years? I was working late, trying to build a future for us. I thought we were on the same team. Clearly, I was wrong. As she stormed upstairs, muttering something about how she didn't have to deal with this, I felt my chest tighten. The rage inside me was threatening to boil over. But this was just the beginning of a nightmare I never saw coming. The next day, I decided I needed answers, real answers, not her lies. I started digging, following the crumbs she had carelessly left behind. Bank statements, odd receipts, and more messages she hadn't bothered to delete. Each piece of evidence painted an even darker picture. Jessica hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She'd brought her lover into our home. This wasn't just infidelity. This was war. By the next evening, I was done playing detective. I had enough evidence to fill a file cabinet and enough anger to blow the roof off our house. But what pushed me over the edge wasn't the texts or the receipts. It was seeing him. Jessica thought I'd be working late. She didn't expect me to come home early. I pulled into the driveway and spotted an unfamiliar black SUV parked outside. My gut told me who it belonged to, and I wasn't wrong. I crept into the house, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Voices floated down from the living room. Hers, light, playful. His, deep and smug. They were laughing. For a split second, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to walk away, pack a bag, and never look back. But the other part, the one fueled by betrayal and humiliation, pushed me forward. When I stepped into the living room, Jessica froze mid-laugh. She looked at me like I was a ghost. And Brian, well, he just smirked. A big, self-assured smirk that made my blood boil. Mark, Jessica started. her voice dripping with fake innocence. "What are you doing home?" "I could ask you the same thing," I said. My eyes locked on Brian. He didn't even flinch, the bastard. "This isn't what it looks like," she said, already scrambling for excuses. "Oh, I think it's exactly what it looks like," I shot back. My voice was shaking, but I kept my feet planted. "You brought him into our house?" "Into my house." "Hey man," Brian said, leaning back like he owned the place. "Maybe you should chill out. Jess said you'd overreact." That was it. That smug tone. That casual dismissal of everything I'd built with Jessica. It snapped something inside me. I lunged at him, fists clenched, but he was faster than I expected. He shoved me back, hard, and I stumbled into the coffee table. Jessica screamed, but not at him, at me. "Mark, stop it. You're acting crazy," she shrieked. Brian stood over me, his smirk replaced by something darker. "You're pathetic, you know that?" he sneered. "No wonder she wanted someone else." Before I could respond, he reached down, grabbed my phone from the floor, and smashed it against the wall. "You're not calling anyone," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I'm going to destroy you now." Something primal took over. I scrambled to my feet and bolted for the garage, my mind racing. I needed something, anything, to defend myself. My hand landed on a hammer, and without thinking, I turned back to face him. He followed me into the garage, his fists clenched, his steps slow and deliberate. "You think you can scare me with that?" he taunted. I didn't respond. Instead, I swung. The hammer connected with his forehead, and he crumpled like a rag doll. Jessica screamed, running into the garage, her face pale. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she cried, rushing to Brian's side. "What's wrong with me?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. "You bring this guy into my home, let him threaten me, and I'm the crazy one?" "He's bleeding," she sobbed, cradling Brian's head. "Good," I snapped, tossing the hammer onto the workbench. "Now get him out of here before I call the cops." Her head snapped up, her eyes blazing with fury. "Call the cops? You just assaulted him. You'll go to jail." "Maybe," I said, my voice cold and steady. "But I'll make damn sure they know about every dime you've stolen from our joint account and every text you've sent to this lowlife. Let's see how your perfect little fantasy holds up then." She glared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. For once, she didn't have a snappy comeback. "You've got 5 minutes to get him out of here," I said, stepping past her. "After that, I'm pressing charges for trespassing. Oh, and Jessica? Don't think for a second you're staying here tonight." I walked out of the garage and into the night, the cool air hitting my face like a slap. My hands were shaking, and my heart felt like it was about to explode. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. This wasn't going to end with a single blow to the head. This was just the beginning. That night I didn't sleep, not even for a second. Instead, I sat in the dim light of my office, piecing together a plan so airtight that neither Jessica nor her smirking lover would see it coming. This wasn't just about justice anymore, it was about taking back control. When Jessica finally came back into the house after dragging Brian's limp body out, she didn't speak to me. She stomped up the stairs, slammed the bedroom door, and locked it. Fine by me. I didn't need to hear another excuse or half-assed apology. By morning, my decision was made. The first step? Hit her where it hurt most. Her perfect little image. I spent hours gathering every piece of evidence I had. Screenshots of texts, bank statements showing unexplained withdrawals, and a copy of her emails I'd forwarded to myself months ago when I first noticed her acting strange. Every lie she told was laid bare, every betrayal cataloged in excruciating detail. Once I had it all, I uploaded it to a secure cloud drive with a title only Jessica would understand. The Truth About You. The next step was more personal. I called her family first. Her parents and her younger sister, people she idolized and couldn't bear to disappoint. "Hi, Mrs. Monroe," I said, my voice steady but cold. "I thought you should know what Jessica's been up to. You might want to sit down for this." By the time I was done explaining, Her mother was in tears, her father was furious, and her sister swore she'd never speak to her again. That's not all, I added. She's also been taking money out of our joint account. Thousands of dollars. I thought you'd want to know since she borrowed $5,000 from you last month. Didn't she? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. She, what? Her father finally said, his voice shaking. Yeah. Thought you'd want to hear it from me before she tries spinning another one of her stories. I hung up before they could ask anything else. Step 1 was complete. Jessica's safety net was gone. Next, I called our mutual friends. Every last one of them. I told them the truth, sparing no detail. The texts, the stolen money, the other man, everything. Most of them were shocked. A few of them were suspiciously quiet, which made me realize they probably knew more than they'd ever admit. Jessica had allies. But now, so did I. The final step? My lawyer. I wasn't naive enough to think I could handle this without legal help. By the time Jessica woke up that morning, she was served with divorce papers. I'd included a list of demands. The house, repayment of the money she'd stolen, and an immediate separation agreement. I didn't do this quietly. Oh no. I made sure the process server showed up while she was having coffee on the front porch, still groggy from last night's chaos. The look on her face when she saw the envelope was priceless. What the hell is this? She snapped, storming into the house. Divorce papers, I said, not even looking up from my laptop. Congratulations, Jessica. You're finally free to be with Brian. Her face turned beet red. You're insane. This is insane. I'm not signing this. You will, I said calmly. Because if you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. Your family already knows. So do our friends. And if you push me, I'll take it to your boss too. Let's see how your coworkers feel about someone who steals from their own husband. Her jaw dropped, and for a moment, I thought she might throw the coffee cup she was holding. Instead, she slammed it down on the counter and stormed out, muttering curses under her breath. But the best part? That wasn't even the highlight of my day. By the afternoon, I'd received a phone call from the police. Turns out Brian had been taken to the hospital and reported the assault. But what he didn't realize was that I'd already filed a police report of my own, complete with security footage from the garage showing him lunging at me first. When the cops showed up at my door, I handed them a flash drive with everything they needed. By the end of the day, Brian was the one in custody for trespassing and assault. Jessica came home that evening to find her lover in jail, her family refusing to answer her calls, and her husband smiling for the first time in weeks. You think you've won? She hissed, standing in the doorway like a cartoon villain. Oh, I haven't even started, I said, leaning back in my chair. But I will say it's been a good day. By the next morning, Jessica's carefully curated life was unraveling faster than she could patch it together. She thought she'd weathered the storm after I served the papers. But she had no idea I wasn't just ending our marriage. I was dismantling her world, piece by piece. While she was out God knows where, probably crying to one of her friends who was pretending to be on her side, I was busy with my next move. This time it was about exposing her publicly. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted her to feel what I'd felt. Humiliated, betrayed, destroyed. I started by uploading the truth about you file to a private but accessible link. I made sure it contained nothing but cold, hard facts. Screenshots of her texts with Brian, a copy of her bank statements showing the missing money, and, just for good measure, a timeline of her lies, meticulously crafted with receipts and dates. Then I sent the link anonymously to everyone who mattered to her. Her boss, her coworkers, her social club, even her yoga instructor. It was ruthless, sure, but this wasn't just about her infidelity. This was about exposing the real Jessica Monroe, the one she'd hidden behind that perfect smile for years. By the afternoon, my phone was blowing up. Mutual friends were calling to ask if it was true. Some were horrified. Others admitted they'd suspected something for a while. But the best call came from Jessica herself. You bastard! She screamed as soon as I picked up. Do you know what you've done? My boss just put me on unpaid leave because of your little stunt. Oh, You mean the boss you lied to about why you kept taking sick days to meet Brian? I said, my voice dripping with mock concern. Yeah, I'm sure he's real upset with me. Mark, I swear to God. Swear to God what, Jessica? I interrupted, my voice rising. That you'll do what? Ruin my life? Newsflash, you already tried that. Now you get to live with the consequences. She hung up, but not before I heard her sobbing. Good. But this wasn't over. There was still Brian. I wasn't satisfied with him sitting in a jail cell for a couple of days. No, that was just a warm-up. I did some digging and discovered he had a live-in girlfriend named Amanda. She had no idea what he'd been up to, or so I thought. When I called her, I expected outrage, maybe denial. What I didn't expect was laughter. Oh, you think you're the first husband to call me about Brian? Amanda said, her tone sharp as a knife. That loser's been cheating on me for years. I only keep him around because he's good for paying the rent. Well, he's not paying anything from a jail cell, I said. And I've got a hammer to thank for that. Amanda paused, then let out a dark chuckle. Maybe I'll swing by and pick up the rest of his stuff while he's locked up. I've been meaning to throw him out anyway. It was almost too perfect. The man who thought he could take everything from me had nothing left himself. But fate wasn't done with Jessica and Brian yet. That evening, as I was settling in with a drink and watching the fallout unfold on social media, because yes, the link had made its way there, Jessica showed up at the house. She was a mess, hair disheveled, mascara streaking her face, and clutching a stack of papers like her life depended on it. Mark, she said, her voice trembling. Please, let's talk. Oh, now you want to talk? I said, leaning against the doorframe. After you've lied, cheated, stolen, and brought that clown into our home? You're lucky I'm not pressing charges for what he did. She held out the papers, her hands shaking. I'll sign the divorce papers. All of them. You can have the house, the money, everything. Just, please stop. Stop what? I asked, my tone ice cold. Telling the truth? That's all I've done, Jessica. Expose the truth. Her lip quivered, and for a split second, I thought she might actually apologize. But instead, she did what she always did, turned it around on me. You've ruined my life, Mark, she spat, her voice rising. You didn't just want to leave me. You wanted to destroy me. You're a monster. I laughed. A deep, bitter laugh that came from somewhere I didn't even know existed. Ruined your life? Jessica, you did that all on your own. All I did was shine a light on the mess you made. She stood there, seething, until finally, she threw the papers at me and stormed off into the night. I watched her go, the weight in my chest slowly lifting. The next morning, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, peace. Jessica had signed the divorce papers, Brian was still cooling off in a jail cell, and her reputation was in shambles. But something didn't sit right. Maybe it was the quiet. Or maybe it was the nagging feeling that Jessica wasn't done playing games. Whatever it was, I decided not to let my guard down. That decision saved my life. By mid-afternoon, a police cruiser pulled into the driveway. 2 officers knocked on my door, their expressions unreadable. Mark Peterson? One of them asked. Yeah, that's me, I replied, my stomach tightening. You're under arrest for aggravated assault, he said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. What? My heart dropped. That's insane. Brian attacked me. There's video footage. Save it for the station. The officer cut me off. They hauled me into the car, my neighbors gawking as I was driven away. At the precinct, they showed me the evidence, a grainy video from Jessica's phone. The angle was perfect, showing me swinging the hammer at Brian but conveniently cutting off what had happened before. I felt the blood drain from my face. Jessica had set me up. Hours later, I was released on bail thanks to my lawyer, but the damage was done. My mugshot was already plastered across social media with headlines like "Husband's brutal revenge goes too far." I barely made it back home before my phone started buzzing. Calls, texts, emails, all from people who once supported me but now wanted answers. Jessica was playing the victim and people were buying it. That night, I sat in the dark, my mind racing. She wasn't just trying to escape the mess she'd made. She was trying to bury me in it. The officers dragged me into the station like a common criminal. I kept replaying the smug look on Jessica's face as they cuffed me. She'd planned this, her final, desperate move to flip the script. The whole world would see her as the victim while I became the monster in her carefully constructed tragedy. Sitting in the interrogation room, I realized how deep her betrayal ran. The edited footage was damning. Without context, it painted me as an unhinged aggressor. The hammer in my hand was all the proof anyone needed. But I wasn't done fighting. I demanded my lawyer and stayed silent as the officers grilled me. They didn't have much beyond Jessica's evidence and her tearful statement. After what felt like hours, I was released on bail. My lawyer, Tom, picked me up, his face grim. "This isn't good, Mark," he said as we drove away. "The footage is bad enough, but Jessica's playing the victim perfectly. Public sentiment is turning against you." I clenched my fists. "She's lying, Tom. There's footage from my security cameras, unedited. And I bet she's got more skeletons in her closet than anyone knows." Tom nodded, but his expression didn't change. "You need to be ready for a fight. This isn't just about the legal system anymore. It's a public opinion war." That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my desk, going over every piece of evidence I had. Jessica wanted to bury me, but she'd underestimated how far I was willing to go. First, I contacted the security company and requested the raw footage from the garage. Within an hour, I had the file in my inbox. Watching it made my blood boil all over again. There it was, Brian lunging at me, shattering my phone, and threatening me before I defended myself. Next, I combed through Jessica's social media accounts. It didn't take long to find a pattern. Pictures of lavish dinners, spa days, and weekend getaways, none of which I'd been a part of. She'd been flaunting her affair in plain sight. But the real jackpot came when I hacked into our shared email account. It wasn't hard. Jessica never bothered to change her passwords. Hidden in a folder marked personal was an email chain between her and Brian. And that's when I found it, the smoking gun. They'd planned everything, from provoking me in the garage to editing the footage to make me look like the aggressor. They even joked about how stupid I'd look trying to explain myself. I forwarded the emails to myself, feeling a cold satisfaction settle over me. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was justice. The next day, I went back to Tom with everything I'd uncovered. He reviewed it in silence, his eyes narrowing as he read through the emails. "This changes everything," he said finally. "The edited footage is inadmissible now that we can prove it was manipulated. And the emails? They're premeditation. That's criminal conspiracy." "Good," I said, my voice hard. "Let's make them pay." Tom got to work immediately, filing motions to dismiss the charges against me and launch an investigation into Jessica and Brian. Meanwhile, I took matters into my own hands. I leaked the unedited footage online, along with the incriminating emails. But I didn't stop there. I wrote a detailed post explaining everything, from Jessica's affair to her attempts to frame me. I included evidence, timestamps, and a clear timeline of events. Within hours, the internet exploded. The narrative flipped. Hashtags like #JessicaTheLiar and #JusticeForMark trended worldwide. People dissected every detail, turning Jessica's lies into memes and dragging her reputation through the mud. Her world collapsed overnight. But the reckoning wasn't over yet. A few days later, I got a call from Amanda, Brian's ex. Her voice was sharp, but there was an undercurrent of satisfaction. "Guess who just got fired?" she said. "What?" "Brian," she replied. "I sent his boss those emails you leaked. Turns out, they don't take kindly to employees conspiring to frame people for crimes. Oh, and I threw his stuff on the curb. If he's lucky, the trash collectors haven't picked it up yet." I couldn't help but laugh. For once, the universe seemed to be on my side. But Jessica wasn't going down quietly. She showed up at my house that evening, banging on the door like a lunatic. "Mark, open up," she screamed. I didn't move. Let her yell. Let the neighbors see the real Jessica Monroe. Eventually, she slumped against the door, sobbing. "Why are you doing this to me?" she wailed. I opened the door just enough to look her in the eye. "Doing this to you?" I said, my voice low and cold. "You did this to yourself. And now you're finally paying for it." She stared at me, her face crumpling. For a moment, I thought she might apologize. But instead, she spat at my feet and stormed off into the night. By the end of the week, the charges against me were dropped. Jessica and Brian, on the other hand, were facing criminal charges for conspiracy, defamation, and fraud. I watched the news coverage with a quiet satisfaction. The reporters dissected every detail of their scheme, their faces plastered across every screen. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Jessica had tried to destroy me, but all she'd done was destroy herself. With the charges dropped and Jessica's lies exposed, I thought the storm had finally passed. But as it turned out, my life was about to take a turn I couldn't have anticipated, even in my darkest imaginings. One evening, about 2 weeks after the media frenzy, I received an anonymous package on my doorstep. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, with no return address. Normally, I'd have been cautious, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a thick manila folder, packed with documents. At first glance, it looked like legal paperwork, bank statements, receipts, and handwritten notes. But as I dug deeper, a chill ran down my spine. The folder was filled with evidence of Jessica's other life. It turned out, Brian wasn't her only affair. There were 3 others, all of them spanning years of our marriage. One was a coworker, another a man from her gym, and the last, shockingly, was a contractor we'd hired to remodel the bathroom 2 years ago. Each affair had its own sordid story. And Jessica hadn't just been sleeping around. She'd been stealing. Every man she'd been involved with had unknowingly funded her lifestyle. She'd siphoned money from me, sweet-talked her lovers into giving her gifts, and even taken loans in their names. One note, in particular, stood out. It was scrawled on a scrap of paper and stuffed between 2 pages of receipts. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakably hers. "Brian's temper is a problem. If he finds out about Greg, he'll lose it. Keep him distracted. If things go south, Mark is the scapegoat." I stared at the note for what felt like an eternity. This wasn't just infidelity or betrayal. This was premeditated destruction. I couldn't help but wonder, who sent the folder? None of the lovers would have turned her in. They had too much to lose. Then it hit me, Amanda, Brian's ex. She must have had access to his email and dug up whatever dirt she could find. Grateful as I was, this folder was more than just a revelation. It was a weapon. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer, Tom. I handed him the folder, and his eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. "This changes everything," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "How much trouble is she in?" I asked, trying to suppress the surge of vindictive satisfaction rising in my chest. "Trouble?" Tom snorted. "Mark, if even half of this is provable, she's looking at jail time for fraud, theft, and possibly identity theft." I nodded, feeling the weight of the past few months lift just a little. "Then let's make sure it's all provable." While Tom worked on the legal side of things, I began to plan my next move. Jessica had always cared about appearances. Her polished image, her social status, her picture-perfect life. I knew the most painful blow wouldn't just come from legal consequences, but from exposing her entire web of lies. First, I reached out to her family. Her father, still seething from the $5,000 she'd borrowed, was more than willing to hear me out. I handed over copies of the folder, watching as his face turned redder with every page. "I always knew she was selfish," he muttered, shaking his head. "But this is criminal." "It is," I agreed. "And she's going to face the consequences." Her family turned their backs on her completely. Even her mother, who'd always defended Jessica's behavior, couldn't stomach the sheer scope of her deceit. Next, I went to the people she'd wronged. The contractor, the coworker, and even the man from her gym. Each of them received an anonymous package containing proof of her betrayal. I didn't expect them to confront her directly, but I knew the knowledge alone would haunt her. Jessica, of course, tried to fight back. She went on a social media spree, posting tearful videos about how she was being slandered and how I was obsessed with ruining her life. But by then, no one was listening. The tide had turned completely. The comments on her posts were brutal, calling her out for her lies, her affairs, and her manipulation. People she once called friends openly condemned her. And then came the final blow. A news outlet picked up the story. It wasn't just local gossip anymore. It was national news. Socialite exposed. The twisted web of lies behind the scandal. They ran the story for weeks, dissecting every detail, from her affairs to the fraud charges she was now facing. Jessica disappeared after that. I heard through the grapevine that she moved to a small town in another state, hoping to escape the backlash. But the internet never forgets, and neither do the people she wronged. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The legal battles were wrapping up. My name was cleared, and Jessica's reign of destruction was over. But the best part? The folder revealed more than just her lies. It showed me something I'd forgotten, my own resilience. I started rebuilding my life, piece by piece. I reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from, poured my energy into hobbies I'd abandoned, and even started dating again. If you'd asked me 6 months ago, I'd have said my life was over. But now, I feel like it's just beginning. Months passed, and life settled into a quiet rhythm. The chaos of Jessica's schemes was behind me, and I was finally reclaiming control. My mornings started with coffee on the patio, my evenings with the kind of peaceful solitude I hadn't known in years. Then one morning I got a call. "Mr. Peterson?" The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. "This is Detective Laura Bennett with the Financial Crimes Division. We've been investigating Jessica Monroe's activities, and we've come across something interesting. We need to meet." Curiosity tugged at me, but I hesitated. "Detective, I've already provided all the evidence I had. What more could you need from me?" She paused, then dropped the bombshell. "This isn't just about your case. It's bigger than that. Jessica might be involved in something far more serious." An hour later, I was sitting in a sterile interrogation room, facing Detective Bennett. She placed a stack of documents in front of me, each one more shocking than the last. Jessica hadn't just been siphoning money from me and her lovers. She was part of a broader scheme, an organized ring of fraudsters who targeted unsuspecting partners, drained their finances, and disappeared. "Jessica's been working with at least 3 other individuals," Bennett explained. "Her role was to establish relationships, gain trust, and access financial resources. Once she'd taken enough, she'd move on, leaving her partners in financial ruin." My head spun. This wasn't just about me anymore. Jessica had built her entire life around deception. "What happens now?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. Bennett's lips pressed into a thin line. "We need your help. Your evidence has been invaluable, but we need more to take down the entire operation. Jessica's our link to the others, and you're the only one who knows her well enough to predict her moves." Against my better judgment, I agreed to help. Not out of any lingering spite, but because I wanted to make sure she could never hurt anyone else the way she'd hurt me. The plan was straightforward. Reach out to Jessica, pretending I wanted to talk. My involvement had to seem genuine, as if I were seeking closure. Meanwhile, the detectives would monitor our interactions, looking for any leads to her accomplices. Took me a few days to muster the courage to call her. When I finally dialed her number, my heart pounded in my chest. "Mark," she answered, her voice tentative. "Why are you calling me?" "I need to talk to you," I said, forcing a calm tone. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. I need closure, Jessica. Please." There was a long pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, trying to decide if this was a trap. Finally, she sighed. "Fine. Meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street tomorrow afternoon." The next day, I walked into the coffee shop, my chest tight with a mix of anxiety and resolve. Jessica was already there, seated in a corner booth, sunglasses perched on her nose. When she saw me, she offered a weak smile. "Mark." "Jessica," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "You look different." She laughed bitterly. Life hasn't exactly been kind lately. I played my part, feigning sympathy. I've been doing some soul-searching. I keep thinking about how everything fell apart. I need to know why. Why did you do it? Her eyes darted around the room, checking for eavesdroppers. You wouldn't understand, she said, her voice low. I had no choice. No choice. I pressed, leaning in. You had everything, Jessica. Why throw it all away? Her hands trembled as she stirred her coffee. I was in over my head, Mark. People I trusted, they weren't who I thought they were. They used me. Who? I asked, my voice steady.